All right, let me admit the rest of the people in the waiting room. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. I am very excited I'm Sarah Fitz, and on behalf of the Equity and Inclusion Committee, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Sarah Abude. Dr. Abboud is going to be speaking to us today about her work in Lebanon. Her presentation is entitled LGBTQ Health in Lebanon, the Role of Community Activism. So thank you so much for speaking with us, Dr. Abboud.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very excited to talk about this specific work because I was telling Sarah earlier, I don't usually get a chance to talk about the work I usually do in Lebanon as much, partly because it is more community activism kind of work, but it also overlaps with research and scholarship at the same time. So yeah, I'm very excited to share with you some of the work that we have been doing over the past several years. I am going to share my screen. Okay. Are you able to see the full screen? Yes, okay, good. In addition to being here at the College of Nursing, I'm an assistant professor in the Human Development Nursing Science Department. I'm also an executive board member of LabMash, or short for Lebanese Medical Association for Sexual Health. And so I'm also going to be speaking on behalf of LabMash as well, even though unfortunately our executive director was not able to be part of the talk today, mostly because of 8-hour differences and electricity, Wi-Fi issues going on currently in Lebanon. So I will be representing the organization. I have no conflict of interest as well to disclose. So briefly, my outline for today is going to be doing an overview of Lebanon just to contextualize the region a little bit, so you have an idea when I'm talking specifically about LGBTQ rights, laws, practices, health. You have an idea of like what context Lebanon is offering, as well as the region in general. And I will go over some of those rights, laws, practices, LGBTQ health research, as well as describe the community-based work and advocacy that's been happening and impacting the queer community in Lebanon at large. So some of you may or may not know, Lebanon is a very small country located in Southwest Asia. So it is this small country here in green. It is bordered by Syria from the north and west, by the Mediterranean Sea from the east, and by the occupied Palestinian territories from the south. For size comparison, it is almost 4 times larger than Rhode Island, which is the smallest state in the US. For the longest time ever, and as long as I've lived there, the population size ranged between 4.5 to 4.9 million individuals, all up till 2010. And in 2011 onward until 2020, the latest estimates of the population size, we had an increase of almost 2 million citizens. And it was specifically related to the war that started in Syria in 2011 that impacted Lebanon and the influx of a big number of Syrian refugees into the country. There's also a big religious and ethnic diversity. Majority of individuals identify as either Muslim, around 55 to 60%, or Christian, around 35 to 40%, with some other minorities. However, it's worth to note that individuals are usually assigned a religion upon birth, and it is based on the father's religion. So these numbers are taken from government documentations of people's assigned religious status on IDs or other government documentation, and not necessarily how people internally or identify with their religion or how they practice it. Also, there's big ethnic and nationality diversity. So in addition to almost everyone identifies ethnically as Arab, but we also have, other than Lebanese, we have big Palestinian refugee community throughout the country. And more recently, as I said, big Syrian refugee community. And another ethnic community is, another big ethnic community is the Armenian community, in addition to other foreign workers who come from different parts of Asia as well as Africa. The official languages are Arabic. French is the secondary official language used in educational as well as government entities, and English is also widely used. There are some estimates that there are more Lebanese, especially first and second generation Lebanese, who live outside of Lebanon than there are inside of Lebanon. And this is related to so many different factors and events that happened historically that I will briefly go over in the next few slides. So Lebanon was part of the Ottoman Empire from the 16th to the early 20th century. And then after the First World War, it was occupied by France for 23 years until it gained its independence in 1943. And then in 1948, the Arab-Israeli War erupted, and that impacted all of the Middle East region, but more specifically Lebanon, because it was right at the border of Palestine, Israel. And so here we started seeing a big influx of Palestinian refugees inside of the country. And because of a lot of internal as well as external factors, between 1975 to 1990, so over a 15-year period, there was the Lebanese civil war. It was based on a lot of religious as well as sectarian conflict, but also during that time, we had the Syrian invasion as well as the Israeli invasion. Israel withdrew from Lebanon in 1990, Syria withdrew from Lebanon in 2005, and then there was another Lebanese-Israeli war that happened in July of 2006, so more recently. The Arab Spring happened in 2011, in addition to the Syrian war. And so again, in addition to having a country that just came out of 15 years of civil war, these two major events took place and affected Lebanon on so many different levels. Already the country was in a situation that did not really, was not very favorable in terms of social well-being, health, stability politically or economically. And the Arab Spring and the Syrian war added to the instability on all of these multiple levels. And so the biggest impact was economically. And in 2019 and 2020, throughout the whole country, protests and civil unrest happened because people were not able to afford even bread. There was a huge economic inflation of all prices that is still happening, unfortunately, until today. So people were suffering still with basic needs, including water, electricity, healthcare services, availability of medications. And that has been an ongoing turmoil throughout the country for decades. In addition to the pandemic that started and hit the whole world in 2020, in August of 2020, there was a huge explosion that happened in the Beirut port, which is the main port of the country that is responsible for the import, export of all major goods that helps keep the country on its feet. There was ammonium nitrate explosion because huge quantities were stored at the port, of course, illegally. And more than 300 deaths, 7,000 injuries, 300,000 homeless individuals, and property damage of more than $50 billion. So all of this to say that on a daily life for every single individual, Lebanese or non-Lebanese living in Lebanon, there are constant daily stressors that are impacting individuals, whether they're physical, mental, or social well-being. And we know from research done throughout the world, specifically research done with LGBTQ individuals, that minority stress theory depicts and provides us with information that individuals with multiple minority identities, and specifically here sexual and gender minority identities, in addition to the daily stressors that happen to people on a regular level, individuals are suffering from stressors that are specific to these minority identities. And so these impacts their rights, their health, their overall well-being on so many different levels. So when it comes to the situation in the Middle East and specifically to Lebanon, we see a lot of LGBTQ rights being violated based on legal aspect as well as social aspect and different practices that are happening throughout the country. And so these are seen to start with on a social level. So whether from a religious or social conservatism perspective, as I mentioned earlier, majority of individuals, whether officially or not, identify as either Christian or Islam. And this by itself translates into a social as well as cultural / religious conservatism that is ingrained in a very cisgender heteronormative perspective throughout the country. And so religious and social norms dictates what is normal, what is not, what is acceptable behavior, what is not, what is sinful or shameful, and what is not. And so obviously heterosexuality, cisgender identities, sex only after marriage or in relation to marriage are somewhat the acceptable norms around gender and sexuality. In addition to the understandings of what masculinity is, so a type of toxic masculinity, patriarchal social norms also prevail, whether from a religious or social perspective, and impact how specifically the LGBT community is stigmatized, treated, or discriminated against. From a legal level, in almost all Middle Eastern countries, there are some types of laws that criminalize in some way or another sexual orientation or gender identity that are not cisgender or heterosexual. In Lebanon specifically, we have Article 534, which states that any sexual intercourse contrary to nature leads to a sentence of prison up to 1 year. And so this article is obviously open to so many different interpretations. And so how people or judges or religious leaders interpret the concept of contrary to nature and what nature is how it is applied throughout the country. So it is a very arbitrary application, whether by police officers or social religious individuals. There are no specific ways of how people use it to criminalize, prosecute, or intimidate. However, just by having that article as a law and the ability to use it to criminalize the LGBTQ community creates a daily stressors and an opportunity for people to be prosecuted on so many different levels. And so, for example, in 2010 and 2011, we saw, for unknown reason, increased numbers of police raids, specifically targeting gay men throughout the country. And so, and going to spaces where they have been known to be LGBTQ friendly, such as specific theaters, bathhouses, nightclubs, and arresting men using the Article 534 as a justification for why they are arresting them. And so in addition to that, there was outrage during these 2 years because of the use of what was called anal examination by forensic doctors to prove that these men have been engaging in anal sex. And through that way, they were able to say that you have been engaged in sexual intercourse contrary to nature, and use those examinations to prosecute gay men throughout the country. So in addition to that, conversion therapies, or also known sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts, are widely used, especially by religious figures, but also have been used by healthcare providers up to a certain time when that changed, and I'll go over why that changed. So in the healthcare system, reports based on a project we conducted interviewing LGBT community about the use of conversion therapy, they reported as well school nurses, parents referring specifically young adults, kids, youth, whenever they suspected anything that is not acceptable or not based on the appropriate gender norms, or people who do not express their gender identity in the same way as they were supposed to, they would refer them to some religious figures or healthcare providers, specifically psychiatrists or psychotherapists, to help them convert or to normalize them. And so these practices are still practiced, but unfortunately we don't have a lot of supportive evidence to know exactly what numbers and how these have impacted the community, especially in their health and mental health. So given all of the negative aspects that I have talked about for the last 15 minutes, obviously there's a lot of work to be done, and there is a lot of the work that has been done as well. And so most of the time media portrays only the negative aspects, and this is what the world sees, that LGBTQ human rights are being violated in these countries. We have these laws, we have these practices, and yes, these exist and violations are been happening. But at the same time, for the last 20 years, there has been huge grassroots movements and activism from the LGBT community and their allies to really push forward LGBTQ health and rights. So whether these are through protests happening on a country level, or through different organizations just opening and serving the community and providing support in so many different ways, or from a legal and healthcare aspect where different associations have been collaborating and joining hands to abolish, for example, these anal examinations, or to provide training and support and talk to politicians and work on abolishing the Article 534. We have seen a huge progress and advancement, especially in Lebanon when it is being compared to other Middle Eastern countries. So we've seen pride events happening, protests happening, more representation in the media, more representation on talk shows, and awareness about these issues more than ever before. And so in the last decades, there are so many organizations such as Hilm, Marsa, Mosaic, Arab Foundation for Freedom and Equality, Beirut Pride. These are community-based organizations, just to name a few, there are more, that are known to be founded by LGBTQ individuals and working with the community to push for advancement and support and advocacy for their rights. In addition to that, we also have seen movements from medical healthcare professionals and legal professionals, such as Lebanese Psychiatric Society or the Lebanese Medical Association for Sexual Health, to push toward removing certain practices such as conversion therapy and other practices. We also saw on a social level opening and the availability of safe spaces and community spaces, whether these are like in the forms of clubs or bars or just community spaces where people go and hang out and know that these are places that they will be accepted. It's a space by and for the community. It just created a sense of connectedness and belonging to the community in a safe way. And also we saw since 2010, a huge increase in the number of research conducted in the Arab world, but also more specifically in Lebanon related to LGBTQ health. And so these are some examples of how these social movements and community organizing have impacted the LGBTQ community. In 2012, after the scandals that happened around the anal examinations of gay men who were arrested after several raids, the Lebanese Order of Physicians issued a statement and banned this practice. So no physician, forensic doctor, anyone is allowed to practice this form of examination to prove anything on anyone. In addition, 2013, the Lebanese Psychiatric Society and Lebanese Psychological Association issued statements that homosexuality is not a mental disorder and thus conversion therapy should not be practiced. And so even though this has been issued, we still see this conversion therapy being practiced mostly by religious leaders, but also by healthcare providers. And unfortunately, because of how the system functions in Lebanon with a lot of corruption in all sectors, including healthcare sectors, there are no accountability measures or ways to really follow up on healthcare providers who actually practice these issues other than if a person reports them. More recently, we also have seen from a legal perspective some positive advancement. In 2015, for example, and for the first time, a judge ruled that a transgender man who underwent a gender-affirming surgery, that he has the right to change his gender on his official papers. And this has not been an approved thing or a legal thing before that. And in July 2018, also for the first time, there was a ruling for the first time in a court of appeals that homosexuality is not a crime. And so they refuted Article 534, that it does not apply to homosexuality. And so same gender relationships should not be prosecuted under this Article 534. Still, there's a lot of work to be done, obviously, including the abolishment of this article that is still a threat and is still could be used and is being used to criminalize the community on multiple levels. However, these are, again, few examples of how some positive changes have happened based on these social movements. Now, when it comes specifically to LGBTQ health, I mentioned earlier minority stress theory, and it is mostly conceptualized that these types of stressors that are based on minority identities are unique. And then in the sense that they are additive stressors to the general stressors that are experienced by all people. And so therefore they require some kind of adaptation above and beyond those that are required by individuals who are not stigmatized or discriminated against because of these minority identities or positions. And so health disparities that we see among minorities, and in that case, sexual and gender minorities, do not reflect any issues that are inherent to the individuals, but rather they are the result of persistent stigma, discrimination, and violence directed toward LGBT individuals. And so again, scholarship and research from international work show that the LGBT community faces stigma and discrimination on multiple levels, starting from the families and schools and friends to stigma and discrimination in the media through stereotypical representation of the community, Also, we see this type of stigma and discrimination in work from colleagues, in different institutionalized systems like the healthcare system, educational system, in police, by police and prisons, and obviously in the case in the Middle East through specific laws and policies that criminalize individuals based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. So all these social and structural inequities contribute to these different types of health disparities that we see among LGBT individuals compared to non-LGBT individuals. So we see poorer mental, physical health outcomes, such as higher rates of suicide, depression, anxiety, obesity, smoking, heart disease, also higher rates of HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. We see also lower access to healthcare services because of anticipation or fear of being discriminated against or having experienced discrimination and stigma in the past. In addition, we lack competent and LGBT affirming and inclusive providers. So unfortunately, we have evidence that shows that we as healthcare providers also contribute to these health disparities that are seen in the LGBTQ community. So whether it is because of our lack of training through education or continuing education, or because we have been socialized as we have in our own societies and communities to stigmatize against sexual and gender minorities and internalize these heteronormative and cisgender assumptions. So these become also part of our care that we provide. We see harassment, microaggression, discrimination in the healthcare system, but also more of like inadequate medical systems such as forms, electronic health record, exclusive environments, including like exclusive restrooms. In addition, inadequate communication, lack of preventive services, and all these contribute to poorer health outcomes. So in Lebanon specifically, we see very similar challenges when it comes to health and health outcomes faced by LGBTQ community, like we see in other countries at an international level. And so a lot of misconceptions are still prevailing throughout the society. And these are related to people's understanding of what sexual orientation is, gender identity, or their lack of understanding of these concepts in general. And of course, they are influenced by multiple internal, interpersonal, societal, and structural levels. And so one of the main misconceptions that still prevail is that homosexuality and transgender identities are a mental disorder. And so, so this lends itself to, since they are a mental disorder, they can be cured. And so this feeds into those practices of conversion therapy that any individual who identifies with these identities can be cured and should be cured. Similarly, sexual orientation is still seen and understood as a choice or a lifestyle. So again, it feeds into the idea that you can decide if you want to be straight or if you want to be gay, you can turn it on and off, obviously. So this again feeds into the widely practiced conversion therapy throughout the country, because people can, the assumption that people can change their sexual orientation. In addition, another misconception is that appearance reflects your sexual orientation. And so this is where people confuse the concepts of gender identity with sexual orientation. So for specifically individuals who are gender nonconforming or do not, the way they express their gender identity do not necessarily fit within the binary boxes of masculinity and femininity and how these are understood in Lebanon. people make assumptions about their sexual orientation, and this opens up like rooms for stigma and discrimination against those individuals. A recent study in Lebanon looked at the representation of the LGBTQ community on TV and in media. And also it supported this idea that society's views of the community is strongly influenced also by the way the community is being represented on TV. So whether through ridiculing the community, especially the gay community, or just misrepresenting them, focusing specifically on their sexuality, especially when we talk about transgender individuals, hosting them on TV shows, but constantly focusing on their genitals and their sexuality. A lot of these biased depictions and inaccurate depictions of the community has influenced the society's perception at large. In 2015, the Arab Foundation for Freedom and Equality did a survey throughout the country and looked at 1,200 randomly selected Lebanese people and their attitudes and beliefs about sexual orientation, gender identity, and the LGBT community, and found that 56% agreed that sexual behavior is private and shouldn't be judged. Almost 56% also agreed that any sexual act between consenting adults should be illegal. So even though this gives somewhat like maybe a positive hope that at least more than half of the population has some understanding of acceptance of the ideas of sexual orientation or gender identity. However, the majority still had a lot of misconceptions, misbeliefs, and forms of stigma and discrimination. So for example, 60% thought that a person could stop being homosexual. So again, on this misconception of homosexuality or sexual orientation is a lifestyle or a choice, that it is a mental disorder, that they need conversion therapy, and that, for example, 76% said it would not be beneficial for a society to recognize homosexuality as normal. Similarly, when asked about their attitude toward transgender people, still people had wide beliefs about binary understanding of gender identity, so only male, female identities. And 80% described men who dress as women or women who dress as men as perverts. At LabMash, so the association that I work with, we conducted a study looking at the attitudes of physicians specifically. And it was very much in parallel to the overall societal perceptions of LGBTQ individuals. So around 84% did not, so only around 84% of the physicians did not believe that homosexuality is a mental disorder. Around 79% did not believe that most homosexual people can become heterosexual, so thinking of sexual orientation as a lifestyle. And then the rest, they either said, yes, it is a mental disorder or a lifestyle or a choice, or they did not know. 81% said yes to, I believe that homosexuality is a natural variation. And the remaining almost 18% either said, no, it is not, or they did not know. Similarly, 76% said that they believe that transgender people should be allowed transition from their sex assigned at birth. So a better perception, better views when we look at and compare overall numbers, but still within the healthcare system, we see that there's a lot of misinformation or uncertainty about the ideas of sexual orientation, gender identity, or the community at large. So when it comes specifically to LGBTQ health outcomes, so other than the population's attitude, beliefs about the community, there has been increasing research in the last 2 decades around LGBTQ health. I recently finished working on a scoping review looking at LGBTQ health outcomes in the Middle East and North African region at large. And we looked at all research conducted from 2000 to 2021 and found that there was 98 published articles, peer-reviewed in academic journals, scientific journals. And out of the 24 Middle East, North African countries that we included in our review, these 98 studies were only conducted in 10 countries. So you can see that still in the region at large as well, there's still much more work to be done because there is no information at all around LGBT health in these countries other than those 10 countries. Out of the 98 published studies, almost 1/3 or 33 were conducted only in Lebanon, which is a lot compared to Lebanon being the smallest country compared to all other countries in the region. And so the research that has been conducted in the last 20 years has been mostly conducted in the last 10 years. Most of the research were published in the last 10 years. Sexual health was, not surprisingly, the biggest portion of all the research that is being done with the LGBT community. So even though rates of HIV are not very high, but rates of other sexually transmitted diseases were high. There was also low rates of condom use, high rates of multiple sexual partners. Only one study is looked at PrEP. And there's also a lot of lack of knowledge and information when it comes to any type of sexual health safer practices. 6 studies were conducted on mental health and also reported high rates of depression, anxiety, suicide. They also included information or work on social support, coping mechanism, that also showed different ways of how the community in Lebanon is able to cope and survive and day-to-day experiences of stigma and discrimination. There were 2 studies that looked at violence and discrimination. Even though other studies did include some measures of violence and discrimination, but only 2, their main aim was looking at experiences of violence and discrimination. And the numbers were also very, very high, unfortunately. So when it comes to experiences of discrimination, whether verbal or sexual or physical or emotional, more than 50% of any sample that was included in all of these studies reported some type of discrimination or violence that they have experienced, whether as in their childhood or in their adulthood. One study looked at experiences with the healthcare system, and one study looked at specific gender identity related determinants. Out of these 33 studies, 23 were conducted, so the majority were conducted with men who have sex with men or men who identify as gay. Only one study was conducted with sexual minority women, and 9 out of the 33 were conducted with transgender women specifically. There were no studies conducted with transgender men. So these are just examples of the titles of those articles. These are specifically the ones related to sexual health. So as you see, the majority are with men who have sex with men. So looking at prevalence of HIV, STIs, sexual stigma, condom use, and other sexual behaviors. These are examples from studies conducted with transgender individuals. There was only one intervention that was developed for transgender women in Lebanon, working on improving sexual and mental health outcomes in the community. I will briefly go over one of the studies that we conducted at LabMash that looked at the experiences of the LGBT community with the healthcare system. And so we interviewed 17 participants from the LGBTQ community, And some of the themes that came up were anticipation of discrimination, experiences with healthcare providers that were positive and negative, but mostly negative. So these also include experiences of discrimination. There were some specific experiences that were related to transgender individuals, such as being refused care or treatment because of their gender expression, issues regarding the legal aspect of their identities, so not being able to change their gender markers, and so their identities show a gender that they do not identify with, which creates a lot of obstacles and challenges for them to receive health. We also asked them about their expectations from LGBTQ affirming providers and the roles of community-based organizations in their health and well-being. So I'll briefly go over a few quotes that some participants shared. This quote is from a cisgender bisexual woman who was talking about her experiences with trying to get sexual and reproductive health care. She said, "I've never felt safe to go to any OBGYN before because of several issues. The fact I was sexually active, I felt that maybe if I go to any OBGYN, they would judge me for it. They would judge me for this." And so this also reflects not just the discrimination based on her sexual orientation, but also just by being a woman, being sexually active and not married, she is going to be stigmatized for this. And also the fact that I had an abortion before, things that I should mention to an OBGYN when I go. And the fact that I have had in the past male partners and now that I have women partners. So that was mainly why I didn't want to go to an OBGYN. So many of these participants talked about not wanting to go to any healthcare provider anymore, but preferring to go to community-based organizations who have their own healthcare providers who they know they would be more affirming and inclusive in their care, especially like the well-known community-based organizations that are LGBTQ friendly. This participant said, "I don't trust the professionals or doctors. I've had therapists, me and my friends, blurt things to our parents. That has been breached on multiple occasions." So again, not trusting providers out of fear of that they would breach their confidentiality or out them to their parents. So, or to other people in the community. And knowing how small Lebanon is, they are always afraid that because it happened before, that the doctors are going to tell their parents, or they're going to tell other people in the community about their sexual orientation. This participant also, he was a cisgender gay man. He said, "I told him about homosexuality, so he told him about his sexual orientation. So the doctor replied that this thing you can change, which made me very upset. The psychiatrist said, I wish you can just change your orientation. And if you don't want to, it's better not to talk about it in public because it is not acceptable in Lebanon. So I wish you can find a good girl." So again, these were how we were able also to gather some of the information about how healthcare providers are still, unfortunately, promoting conversion therapy. And so this participant did not go through conversion therapy because he was not convinced and he believed in his sexual identity. But unfortunately, his psychiatrist did not, and he wanted him to go through conversion therapy to change his orientation. So when we asked them about what would they expect or what would they be looking for from an LGBTQ affirming provider, one participant said, I guess they should be somehow trained in order to be more accepting and understand the gay culture, to understand the LGBTQ community, to understand the difference between sexual orientation and gender identity, to understand that it's a very thin line between them, but they are completely different things, not to judge a person for being gay. Finally, this guy said, when I'm not treated like a gay guy, that's when I feel I can really respect a doctor and tell him anything. So again, many participants here talked about whenever they disclose their sexual orientation or their gender identity to their provider, the whole conversation would be focused on that topic, even if they went to see a provider for a pneumonia or for a flu or a cold. So nothing related to that. Everything would focus on the idea of sexual behaviors, being a gay person or a transgender person. So they really wanted a doctor who can know when to talk about sexual behaviors when they are relevant, or their identity when it is relevant and when they should not as well. So some of the work, the research that has been published has been done by the Lebanese Medical Association for Sexual Health that I am part of. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this specific association and the work that we have been doing that helped also by joining forces and movement with other organizers to really change some of the perceptions and work around LGBT health in Lebanon. And so the association was founded in 2012, and it was initially founded by 4 psychiatrists who saw the need, obviously, in Lebanon to specifically focus on healthcare providers to raise awareness and education and change policy related to the work that healthcare providers specifically do when it comes to LGBTQ health. And even though the name is very specific to sexual health, our work is way beyond sexual health. And so to be officially recognized as a organization, a nonprofit organization in Lebanon, we obviously could not have the words LGBTQ or sexual gender minority or queer or any of these terms in our official name. So we decided to use the umbrella term of sexual health to be able to get approval, like official government approval for our organization. However, still do the work that we need to do to promote and advance LGBTQ health. So our vision is to achieve equity in health with focus on sexual health and the health of marginalized groups, such as LGBTQ individuals, women, girls, people living with HIV, and refugees. Our organizational structure is based on an executive board members, which I am part of, and it's a very now it's a very interdisciplinary group of healthcare providers. As I said, initially it was only psychiatrists, and now we have almost half of the board is nurses, and then including our president, who is for the first time a nurse leading this association. But we also have pediatricians, psychologists, OBGYN physicians, and other specialties as well. We do have 2 full-time staff who run the day-to-day operational activities. We have monthly meetings, and we function through 4 different time zones because the majority of our board and staff are located in Lebanon, but we also have board members who are in the US or in different time zones, as well as in England. Our 3 main focus areas are to conduct research with the community, to provide educational awareness, trainings, as well as to work on changing policies throughout the country. Our target population are healthcare providers, but we also work towards raising this kind of awareness and education to the general public as well. This is a picture from one of our board meetings last September. So we hold all our board meetings virtually since we are in different countries. We plan everything virtually, but as I said, Saad, who is on the top of the picture, is our executive board member, and she is located in Lebanon. So some of the accomplishments that we've done over the last like 5 to 6 years, one of them was a main product that where we developed something we called Lab Guide or Lebanon Guide. This was based on the research study that I presented some of the findings, where we conducted survey with physicians throughout the country to better understand their knowledge and attitudes and behaviors toward LGBTQ individuals. And then when we also interviewed LGBTQ community members about their experiences with the healthcare and also their expectations from affirming providers. Another part of that project was also interviewing community-based organizations to also come up with a system where we now are able to identify LGBTQ affirming healthcare providers and can list them on our online lab guide directory. So it is a directory posted on our website. And we list the names of healthcare providers, of course, with their permission. And after they go through this vetting system, so they go through a survey, then an in-depth one-on-one interview, and then we vet them from community organizers and community members. And once they are vetted, they are added to our online directory. And so any member from the LGBTQ community who is looking to go to, for example, a dermatologist or a psychologist or a family health provider can go on our website and find a provider who they can trust that they will not experience stigma or discrimination or fear going there because no one knows that provider before. So that was a main accomplishment. And the directory started with 45 physicians, and now it is expanding. We now have 52, and we still are expanding this list. As I mentioned, we also provide trainings throughout the country, specifically to healthcare providers and students. So in any field, we provide trainings almost on monthly levels on regular basis. And more recently, in this past year, we have had many firms and companies and different institutions that are not healthcare focused reach out to us to provide similar trainings for their staff, specifically their human resources. And so now we've developed this like sticker or like a certificate, then that once people get trained, they hang this in their space that says this establishment welcomes all sexual and gender identities. So just a way to show that it's a safe space for people to come and receive any type of services. We've also been working with specifically hospitals to implement anti-LGBTQ workplace discrimination policies. We've been successful with 2 in Beirut, and we've been working with others as well. We teamed up with the World Professional Association on Transgender Health, and we translated to Arabic the WPATH, their standards of care in transgender health. So these are like international guidelines used to provide care for transgender individuals. And so with our work with WPATH, we were able to translate and have those available to not just Lebanon, but the Arab nations as well. And as I said, we still work very closely with all grassroots organizations to hopefully one day get to abolishing Article 534. This is an example of some of the national awareness campaigns that we did a few years ago. We received funding for this, where we conducted some community-based work. And then we did over a month-long period campaigns over social media, on TV, over the radio, but also billboards all over the country that says homosexuality is not a disease, homosexuality is a natural state, attempts to convert gay people are harmful, they should be banned. And so obviously all this work comes with a lot of obstacles and challenges. So just to get approval to be able to put like banners, or not banners, like billboards on streets and highways was like, it took forever to do that. But at the same time, this campaign created a huge attention throughout the country around this issue. So we were invited to like give information and talks about it and what it is about. And so we were able to go to spaces that have never talked about these issues before and talk about these issues before. So it really created attention to the topic and started conversations in new places that usually do not talk about these issues. We also have developed like educational videos that are available on our websites as well as on YouTube. And when we develop them, usually we do like a big social media campaign around them. One, for example, on the right is like just a very one-on-one description and informational material on what is gender. The one on the left talks about conversion therapy. So that was after we did another community project and we tried to understand what goes on in people's houses. What do they talk about? What are some of the conversations that happen around like gossip and over coffee, and how do people talk about these issues? And we created a video just to show people that these are harmful practices and should not be talked about, should not be practiced, but should be talked about. So I'm gonna share with you this video since I still have a little bit of time. I was worried I would be running out of time. It is in Arabic, but it has subtitles. So I hope you will be able to follow through the subtitles.
كان عمره 16 سنة لما أخذوه أهله عن هيدا الدكتور. يا ويلي عن هالموقف. بلش يعطيه حبوب قال بيزيد رغبته الجنسية وبركي بصح. وفي هيدي البنت أخذتها رفيقة أختها عن معالج نفساني. قال هو بيفهم بالماورائيات. من وقتها ما سلم عليها رعبها. قال لها أنت منك لحالك وفي شي وراكي عم بيلحقك وهو اللي مأثر على ميولك الجنسية. بعدين حط ايده على رقبتها قال لها خدي نفس عميق، غابت عن الوعي وما بتتذكر شيء. وفي هيديك الخبريه ولا ما بتذكر قد ايه اخذ منهم، بس قنعهم هيدا الحكيم انه هو عنده الحل الوحيد لمعالجه المثليه. وقنعهم كمان انه يدفعوا له مصاري كثير، ويلي طلع معه انه في خلل بالهرمونات وانه شكل العضو هو يلي مأثر على الميول. واهله شباب اعتبروه مجنون وقرروا ياخدوه عن حكيم نفساني. وقت راح عند الحكيم جبروا انه يحط ايده بكيس ثلج تينوجع كل ما عم بيحكي عن افكار المثليه. لهيدي البنت نصحتها المستشاره النفسانيه بالمدرسه الذكيه انه كل ما تطلع بنسوان بطريقه جنسيه تفتح الاجنده وتكتب عن الغلطة تبعها، هيك بتصحح حالها من هالسموم اللي جايين عليها. هيدول القصص بتصير حوالينا كل يوم، وهيدول القصص ضروري انه نحكي فيها، لانه اذا ما حكينا فيها رح تضلها تصير. صار الوقت انه نحكي وانه نعرف انه المثلية مش مرض وما بدها علاج.
All right. So, other activities that we have also been doing and that we do on yearly basis. We do something called Break the Silence competition, which we send out a call for paper submissions from students in healthcare and non-healthcare fields to write or do some research. So to write a paper related to LGBTQ related issues. And every year we choose 3 winners. The first winner usually comes to the United States and attends the GLAMA annual conference on the LGBTQ conference for healthcare providers. And then the second and third winners usually get money for as their prize. on a yearly basis, and this has been happening for 5 years now, we have been doing an annual LGBTQ Health Week. And so usually every year we have it in person. Last year it was virtual. This year we're planning it is usually done in March. We're planning it to be hybrid. And so during that week, we hold one-day conference where we invite healthcare providers from all over the country to talk about any topics related. So every year we have a different theme, and we talk about LGBTQ related health issues. We present some of the research some people have been doing in the country, including the work that LabMash has been doing. And in addition to the conference during that week, we hold several trainings for students as well as campaigns related to LGBTQ health. We do regular assessment of community needs. And more recently, we conducted a mapping of LGBTQ inclusive spaces, especially for Beirut and the Beirut suburbs. So this is a project that we are still now finalizing, where we will be able to provide the community with a map, that shows where the inclusive and safe spaces are for the LGBTQ community. Also, we give a yearly LGBTQ Health Equity Award for a person or an organization that has been working to advance LGBTQ rights and health in the country. Something that we do regularly and not just on a yearly basis, obviously, is we always are working towards securing funds, because we work on a funds basis, whether to pay for our staff, salaries, and benefits, whether to pay for our office rent and anything else, as well as the projects that we do. So usually we get funding from foundations and embassies, and this is something that we're constantly writing grants, submitting, and so far we have been successful in some sort of sustainability for the past 5 years. In addition, we have a sister organization in the US called Friends of LabMash. It is located in New York City, and they hold a yearly Halloween party in October, where they do fundraising, and the money is usually to be sent to Lebanon to support our day-to-day operations. So you are welcome to go, and I will send you, once we plan for next October. These are very fun parties that also support a good cause. This is another example specifically to like the start of the pandemic. So everything went on lockdown, obviously, like anywhere in the world. Lebanon went through a lockdown very early in the pandemic. So lockdown started in February. And then there were several lockdowns throughout the year and still until today, either lockdowns or curfews that are implemented to be able to control the spread of COVID-19, since the healthcare system is really falling apart or has fallen apart. So that was the only way to really control and prevent people from socializing, unfortunately. And so everyone was impacted, obviously. But again, for the LGBTQ community specifically, with everything happening in Lebanon on day-to-day basis, in addition to the explosion that happened in Beirut, and something that I did not mention is that, so Beirut is the capital of Lebanon and considered the most progressive LGBTQ-friendly city in Beirut, obviously, in Lebanon. And so most of those safe spaces, as well as community organizations, are located in Beirut. And when the big explosion happened in August, it impacted, destroyed, people lost their jobs, many people were hurt. And so the LGBTQ community also lost a huge aspect of the only safe spaces that they can go to. And so again, it impacted them on so many different levels. So we held like a national campaign, mostly on social media, trying to support and provide information and tips to individuals while they are in lockdown, how to maintain their safety, their health, how to check on their chosen family members, especially because many young adults still live with their parents in Lebanon, and many who did not live with their parents after the explosion or lockdown lost their jobs, could not pay rent, and they had to go back and live with their parents again. So many had those environments that they were not safe to them or not supportive of their identities. And so we held a lot of sessions, provided some resources. Many of our psychologists who are board members or who are affiliated with us provided free mental health services to the community when needed. And so we also did this short video online that I'll show you. It's also in Arabic, but has subtitles.
They get you in the door with a free weekend trip or dinner or sometimes just a Visa gift card.
Hello, اسمي ريتا كلزي، عمري 29 سنة. I'm lesbian.
أنا ديارا، عمري 24 سنة. أنا bisexual.
اسمي نيس عز الدين، عمري 24 سنة و I'm gay.
أنا اسمي رينيه، عمري 28. I'm transgender.
اسمي كريستيا و I'm bisexual.
Hi, my name is Gigi. I'm 22 years old and I'm a transgender woman.
الكوفيد 19 خلق كتير معاناة بحياتنا اليومية.
كان شيء كتير صعب علي.
إنه إجا الكوفيد 19 عمل مش فصل، عمل شرخ يعني لغى التجمعات.
هلا بوقت كورونا في كتير عالم بايسكشوال وجايز مضطرين يقعدوا مع اهلهم بالبيت، فوانس صار في هالخبريه كلها سوا صاروا مضطرين يواجهوا هالشيء، بس بذات الوقت هن بيعرفوا انه ما فيهم يواجهوا، يمكن انه اهلهم ما بيتقبلوا، بيصير بدهم يفكروا قبل ما يعملوا شغله او يحكوا شغله مرتين.
بعدين بيجيك اللوك داون، هيدا اللوك داون انه انتم رح تكونوا ببيوتكم بعاد عن اصحابكم، بعاد عن الناس اللي بتحبوها.
عندي كثير رفقه من رفقاتي اضطروا يرجعوا بيت اهلهم لانه وقفوا الشغل من ورا الكورونا، هالشيء كثير انه اثر بحياتهم النفسيه، كانوا كل وقت يعني مضطرين يسمعوا حكي من اهلهم انه ظبط قعدتك، ظبط حكيك، ليه كثير فيمينين. في ناس اهلاتهم ابدا ما بيساعدوهم، سبيشلي اذا قرروا يكونوا مرتاحين بالسلف اكسبريشن تاعتهم.
اللي عايشين مع اهلهم او عايشين تحت ضغط معين، اكثر المشاكل اللي ممكن يواجهوها هو التبريتيور او الدبريشن او الاكتئاب، لانه بحس انه نحن بنحب كثير نعبر عن حالنا باي طريقه ممكن، فلما كان ما في لوك داون كنا نلاقي ساعه، نص ساعه، ساعتين نكون فيهم مع اصحابنا على طبيعتنا. لما بدك تكوني انت بمكان مش الك او بجسد مش الك، فكتير الموضوع كتير صعب، او انك تمثلي.
كثير بعرف عالم من رفقاتي especially trans people شغلهم توقف، especially people that work بالنايت لايف او as makeup artists، صار شغلهم لانه basically كل شيء كان مسكر.
كنت اشتغل ببار بمرم خايل، وكان في يكون انا على طبيعتي بطريقه انه البس اللي بدي اياه، صرفت مثل ما بدي، امشي مثل ما بدي، دائما عندك هذا الحكي بسمع كثير، بمشي مثل الشباب، هونيك تحت في اعمل اللي بدي اياه.
في عندي رفيق قريب لإلي مثلا اهلاته بيعرفوا عنه بس ابدا ما بيتقبلوا الموضوع، هيك شغل بباريستا بكوفي شوب كمان وقفوا الشغل لانه كورونا، ما كان عنده حدا يساعده ماديا.
نيسان ابريل صار عندي حراره بال40 وفقدت حاسه الذوق، ضليت تقريبا 7 ايام حراره تقريبا 39-40، فانا عملت لوك داون لحالي. حاولت كتير اني ما اروح على الاوبيتال، لانه حسيت انه حيسالوني على الوراق وحيسالوني انا شو، ففضلت اني ما اروح على الاوبيتال، على المشفى، مشان ما اتعرض لهيدي الكلمات الهجوميه، لانه اوقات الكلمه بتجرح اكثر من الفعل.
And again, in response to some of the economic crash or collapse throughout the country, the pandemic, and as I mentioned, the Beirut explosion, we, over the last year, we put together a coalition of multiple non-governmental organizations throughout Beirut and the suburbs of Beirut a little bit to provide an LGBTQ community fund and to raise funds to support the community, providing them with food, health services, medications, rental support, and cash allowance. So that was very done with great help from all community organizers and not just our association. And so it's always exciting for us when we're doing this work in Lebanon that we also be recognized for it. So in 2017, GLAMA, the LGBTQ Healthcare Association in the US, awarded us with the LGBT Health Achievement Award. And so this helped us also gain more visibility, whether international or national, and opened up doors for LabMash and other community-based organizations also to have an impact outside of Lebanon. So recently we have been also receiving calls from other healthcare providers in the region asking us about how to put together something like LabMash or how to work on providing training, and asking them for different types of trainings for their healthcare community providers or the community at large. And so I know that there's still a lot of work to be done in Lebanon and the region, but as you saw, like there's a lot of work that has been done already and is constantly being done on day-to-day basis. And so that is the end of my talk. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abboud. That was so incredibly informative and really impressive work that you all have been doing. I was hoping to start the conversation off. I'm interested to know how you went about recruiting participants in some of your research, and how difficult, and kind of in conjunction with that, how difficult it's been to obtain grants within Lebanon in terms of your research and like, you know, folks who might be participating in your research being concerned about the publicity that might be associated with that, or, you know, further stigmatization if they're known to be participating in your work.
Yeah, definitely recruitment is always challenging when you're trying to look at or recruit minority populations that want to be invisible and work like actively to remain invisible. But I think using community participatory approaches has been the only successful way of recruiting individuals. And so we, whether the work I do with LabMash or other researchers who have been working in Lebanon, respondent-driven sampling has been a very successful way to recruit large numbers of men who have sex with men, transgender women, especially because these have been most of the research published with these two community groups of individuals. So paying participants to recruit other participants and having that snowball, but in a more active way, has been very successful. Also collaborating with other organizations that actually provide services to the LGBT community is where we have been also successful. So as I said, our association don't provide like healthcare services, but there are several others like MERSA. They provide sexual health services, reproductive health, mental health. So they have on board trained LGBT affirming healthcare providers from the community and who are known to be also part of the community. So this is where most of the LGBTQ individuals go to receive the healthcare because they know that they will not be stigmatized or discriminated against. And so these have been our most successful recruitment. As for funding, it is very, very, very challenging. So I personally have applied with other people to NIH have not been successful, but I know several researchers who have been funded through NIH specifically to conduct work in Lebanon. And I think the largest amount of funding that comes to countries like Lebanon or topics like these are foundation monies, and this is where we have been successful. Embassies are also, embassies around the world usually have pockets of money to fund projects, not necessarily research projects. They don't care about if you're going to publish it or not in scientific journals, but we try to use those projects also as an avenue for our research. So we make sure, even though we don't necessarily tell them that this is a research project, but we ensure to get IRB approval, we ensure to follow all the research rigor in our projects to be able to publish the work that we are doing at the same time as doing it with the community. Gwyneth?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Sarah, great job. Very interesting. I had a question. You mentioned early on when you were going over the demographics about religion and how religion is assigned on the birth certificate based on what the father is, I think you said. I'm just wondering, in practice, how prominent are sexual and gender minorities, like kind of the intersection between religious beliefs and being a sexual or gender minority, and like how does that impact kind of that invisibility you talk about, or being invisible, or just kind of the difficulty that people have that are actively practicing their faith that often is exclusionary to gender and sexual minorities? I don't know if you get my question, but
yeah, definitely. No, it is a very I don't know how to describe it, not common, but it is something that is experienced on daily basis. It is as if the intersections of these two identities, like religious identity, sexual gender, minority identity, should not exist. So it's either you are a religious person or you are a sexual gender minority person. But of course, in our daily lives and the work we do with the community, these do not exist exclusively. Many of the people we work with are very religious, even though they have struggled throughout their identity discovery journey with their religious identity. Many talk about either rejecting one of the other. So this internalized homophobia is very prevalent. At the same time, rejecting certain aspects of your religion is also very prevalent. However, there are a lot of people who come to an age after struggling with those issues and thinking that you will never be accepted as both, come to a sense of self-acceptance, but that takes time and therapy and knowing that there are other people like you who exist as Muslims and gay, as Christians and lesbian. And so it has taken most people like a journey to come to a sense of acceptance that they can be both. And obviously it impacts mental health, social health, because as I said, and you described it, religion is so ingrained in Lebanon. So you are born with a religion, whether you eventually ascribe to it or practice it or not, it's part of people's daily lives. It becomes a cultural, social thing, like the celebration of Ramadan, of Christmas, of prayers, of Sunday church. These become part of like how you are raised within your family. So it is very challenging for sure.
This is Joan Rutman. I have a question regarding the refugees. I understand the economic impact of the refugee crisis and the numbers of people that have just crowded into a very small country. You mention the refugees as part of a community. And are you speaking of the minority LGBTQ gay community within the refugee community? Or are you speaking of refugees as an excluded population within the country of Lebanon? How are you referencing refugees?
So that's a very good question, because I can talk forever about like the situation with refugees in Lebanon. There's a long history of refugees since the Israeli-Palestinian war, with Palestinians being refugees in Lebanon as external refugees to Lebanon. And then with the Iraqi war, there were also Iraqi refugees who moved into Lebanon, and more recently with the Syrian war. So refugees in Lebanon have a very unique status with the government, especially Palestinians. Unfortunately, even if they are born, raised in Lebanon, they never get Lebanese citizenship. And that, of course, impacts their benefits, their social work limitations, healthcare access on so many different levels. But within the LGBTQ community specifically, we have also seen a big number of, and now more than ever with the Syrian refugees, of Syrian refugees who also identify as gay or transgender. Because Lebanon is seen within the Arab region as more progressive, that there is more visibility about LGBTQ rights and advocacy, there's many individuals from neighboring countries who come to Lebanon seeking this type of refuge. And with the Syrian war, there was a disproportionate number of gay, bisexual, transgender specific Syrian refugees who came. And so they are part of the LGBT community as well, but they face an additional level of stigma and discrimination than Lebanese LGBTQ community. We just now finished a study that hopefully submitting the paper soon, comparing men who have sex with men, so gay identifying men, looking at their mental health between Lebanese born and Syrian born individuals, so Syrian refugees in Lebanon. And again, talking about intersectionalities of multiple minority identities, Syrian LGBT refugees face discrimination because they are Syrian, because also of the historical relationship between Lebanon and Syria. So we were at war for many years with Syria, and now Syrian refugees are in Lebanon. So they're not welcomed by many people, unfortunately, and they are discriminated against. And so they're discriminated against because they are gay or transgender, and they're discriminated against because they are Syrians and refugees. So they cannot work, they cannot get like work permits or receive the same type of healthcare access. I hope I answered your question.
You did. So it's basically double discrimination or triple discrimination.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? While you think over things, I want to just point out, I put the link to the survey, to the session evaluation in the chat. So please make sure you fill out an evaluation, and you'll be given the opportunity to obtain continuing nursing education hours for this session. Any other questions?
I had one, Sarah.
Yes.
Sarah Fitz. Hi, Sarah. Really, like everyone's saying, really fantastic presentations. Interesting to hear. So, Sarah, what I was thinking about as you start to get more increasing demand to train folks, it makes me think about this in different settings, even in the U.S. Like, you know, what if it gets to the point that you can't, like the demand kind of exceeds what you're able to do, so it makes me start to think about train the trainer.
Yeah.
Had you, had you started to think about that, or have any ideas about that?
Yes, definitely. So we, in addition to like the executive board who actually do the trainings usually, so I either do them virtually or the board members who are in Lebanon, they do them. I mean, now during the pandemic, they've been virtual, and we just started again doing them in person. But we do have a group of members who we call like, I don't know what is the term, like allies to our association, who also help us in so many different ways throughout the country. They are either healthcare providers or community organizers. And so they've also been part of our training. And many times if us as staff or board members are not able to provide the training, we reach out to them and they can provide those trainings. We need to have a better like structure, I think, and a more formalized process into like the trainer aspect. We have a lot of volunteers, but unfortunately with volunteers, they come and go. You cannot much rely on them. We do train them also to help with the trainings. But we are definitely like behind on human resources. That sure has been a struggle as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an ally and trying to do advocacy work, and you know, I had ideas for maybe considering a train the trainer, but the folks themselves were so stretched thin, you know, didn't have the bandwidth to do it. So it makes you think, oh, you know, how do you address that problem?
Yeah, especially now, like you said, we were just focusing on healthcare providers and students in healthcare fields, but this past months we've been like on monthly basis training like human resources in firms that are not at all related to healthcare, which is it's really positive. Like we're really happy that this is happening.
Right.
But like you said, yes, we're spread too thin to be able to do all of that. Well, thank you, everyone. I know this is like last week of the finals, semester is ending, so I appreciate you coming and listening to this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abboud. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Again, please make sure and fill out the evaluation, and we will let you know when the next Meet and Learn is happening in January.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a good rest of your semester.
You too.
Bye.